Hello and welcome to Omni Deep Dive. We explore any topic from finance and technology to literature and science. Sit back, focus, and get ready to dive deep.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are taking an exhaustive and pretty chilling plunge into the world of John Grisham's legal thriller, The Widow.
Yeah, this one's a wild ride.
It really is. And this isn't just a story about a crime. It's a terrifying look at how crushing personal greed, when you combine it with a seemingly perfect narrative, can just absolutely obliterate a man's life.
That's right. We have stacks of source material here documenting the immense legal and personal implosion of this small-town lawyer, Simon Latch.
Right.
So our mission today is to really unpack the central, almost Shakespearean irony facing him. Simon was indicted for first-degree murder, accused of killing his client, Eleanor Barnett, for a $16 million estate that, well, it was entirely fabricated.
It didn't exist.
It just didn't exist. The most devastating twist imaginable.
It is the ultimate legal hook, isn't it? The core of the prosecution's case wasn't really evidence, it was motive. And a motive built on a foundation of pure fiction. And Simon Latch's pre-existing reputation, the lawyer who is often distrusted, especially when a massive inheritance is on the line, it made him the perfect patsy.
Oh, absolutely.
His own desperation and his short-sighted greed created a circumstantial case so compelling that it seemed irrefutable. And it completely obscured the terrifying truth of the real killer who was just operating in the shadows.
Well, the initial narrative presented by the Commonwealth of Virginia was simple, powerful, and, utterly irresistible to a jury. The corrupt, cash-strapped lawyer poisons the rich, vulnerable widow to steal her fortune before the end of the fiscal year. What's so profoundly fascinating here is how Eleanor Barnett's financial fantasy became the motive. It was a weapon more potent and more destructive than any actual poison, sealing Simon Latch's fate long before any of the true facts came out.
Yeah.
We really need to start by understanding just how deep his financial hole was, because that hole is the only reason he fell for this whole scam.
Okay, let's unpack this miserable existence first. We have to begin with Simon Latch's professional life, because that is absolutely where the erosion started.
It really is.
He was 18 years into his law career, and by his own admission, he was just burned out. His daily grind was a litany of depressing, low-stakes cases, small-time bankruptcies, pathetic drunk driving charges, dubious disability claims, and what he bitterly called the nickel-and-dime car wrecks.
And this wasn't just, mental weariness. It was professional stagnation, and it really showed in his fees. The sources detail the mundane nature of his practice. For instance, he was still charging a flat $250 fee to process a simple will.
Wow.
And as we see, this was a perfect symbol of his professional complacency and exhaustion. He knew intellectually that this was essentially a rickoff.
Right, because you can just get them online now.
Exactly. Legally binding versions are available online for free. And his secretary, Matilda, a very capable woman, did most of the actual work, which left Simon feeling more like an expensive mailbox than a legal professional.
And his personal life was just a mirror image of his professional failure. He and his wife, Paula, they weren't just having disagreements. Their marriage was functionally over and heading straight for a really, really nasty divorce. The tension was so thick that Simon had physically retreated. He was literally sleeping at the office to avoid the marital home. He had set up a narrow cot in a small, unused storage suite upstairs, which he grimly nicknamed the closet.
The closet. That detail alone just speaks volumes about his psychological state, doesn't it?
It does. He was hiding, physically and mentally, from his own life.
And his financial picture was just as toxic, if not worse. And this is the true engine of his downfall. Simon wasn't just dealing with a pending divorce settlement. He was a serious, high-stakes gambler, and he was deeply indebted to the wrong people.
Yeah, that's the key.
Specifically, he owed his local and presumably impatient bookie, named Chubb, over $6,300.
Which might not sound like Wall Street money, but for a guy in his position...
Exactly. For a small-town lawyer facing imminent divorce, struggling to pay his secretary, and living in the closet, it was catastrophic. He needed liquid assets, and he needed them fast. This overwhelming, immediate financial pressure created the perfect vulnerability.
Right.
This is the precise state of mind he was in: desperate, exhausted, and ethically compromised when Eleanor Barnett, or Nettie, walked into his office.
Enter Ms. Eleanor Barnett.
Yeah.
She's 85 years old, appears totally unassuming, and she drives an old Lincoln, a detail that in retrospect, just screams economic reality.
It really does.
She initially appears to be just another $250 will job. Simon is already mentally checking out, ready to hand the work off to Matilda. But then she drops the absolute bombshell that changes everything.
Everything.
She claims her late husband, Harry Corsack, had amassed a truly staggering fortune.
And the story she spins isn't some vague, rambling claim. It's a very detailed and convincing fantasy. She explains that Harry had worked for the Coca-Cola Company for nearly 40 years as a district sales representative.
Okay.
And Nettie claims Harry was astute, buying every single share of stock he could get his hands on via employee options. Then, later in life, he became fascinated with Walmart and invested extensive capital there, too.
So it sounds plausible.
Totally. And then she states the total current value, as of last week's statements, was slightly more than $16 million.
$16 million. I mean, just think about that number hitting a man who owes $6,300 to a bookie and is sleeping on a cot at work.
Ooh, yeah.
Simon's internal reaction is described as just sheer ecstasy, even though he managed to maintain a solemn professional poker face as he scribbled the number down, pretending this sort of thing happened every Tuesday.
Right. Oh, another $16 million estate. Ho-hum.
Exactly. He recognized instantly that this was his salvation. This wasn't just a fee. This was a complete professional and personal rescue package.
And it's crucial to understand the scale of this money in Simon's world. This fortune instantly eclipsed anything he could conceivably earn in 30 years of nickel and dime lawyering.
Sure.
And the first place his mind goes isn't to celebrating Nettie's good fortune, but to the legal intricacies that threaten his future fee. He immediately starts calculating the estate taxes, the potential $8 million that could go up in smoke if they didn't properly structure the estate with a marital trust.
Okay, so this is where we need a moment of clarity for the listener. Why is the marital trust so important here?
Well, in short, it's tax avoidance. When a spouse dies, the law allows a massive amount of assets to pass to the surviving spouse tax-free, often through an instrument like a marital trust.
Mm-hmm.
But when the second spouse, Eleanor in this case, dies, the total value of the estate becomes subject to federal estate tax if it exceeds the federal exemption limit. And $16 million would put them squarely in the territory of owing millions, potentially up to 50% or more, to the government.
So that $8 million figure wasn't an exaggeration.
It's not. Simon's immediate frantic calculation of $8 million up in smoke shows that his primary focus wasn't sound legal advice, but protecting the maximum pot of money possible, because his eventual fee would be a percentage of that retained estate.
And that desire to protect the pot leads him directly into his next action, which is plotting how to secure the executorship and minimize any legal challenges. He's instantly worried about Nettie's two troublesome stepsons, Clyde and Jerry Corsack, who he just knows will contest any will that excludes them.
Exactly. So to preempt a messy, drawn-out litigation that would eat into the fortune, and therefore his fee, Simon advises Nettie to leave each stepson a relatively small sum, $100,000 outright.
Right.
But the key legal maneuver here is the inclusion of a provision that specifically disallows any gift to a person who contests the will. It's commonly known as a no-contest clause.
So the $100,000 is basically a bribe.
It's a bribe to keep them quiet, yeah. Because if the stepsons fight the will and lose, they get nothing. Simon is trying to buy legal silence and secure his position as the executor of this supposed $16 million estate.
And here's the true tragedy and the true irony of the setup. If Simon hadn't been so overwhelmingly blinded by the zeros, if he had just performed an ounce of due diligence or just been less desperate, he would have seen the red flags everywhere.
Oh, they were everywhere.
Nettie was waving them like distress signals.
The behavioral clues were just glaring contradictions to her claimed wealth. She was emotionally fragile, often questioning Simon's faith in her story, asking, pointedly, "You don't trust me, do you, Simon?"
Yeah, that's a bit of a tell.
A huge tell. And her mental state was questionable. She was exhibiting signs of severe mental drifting, like confusing her niece Maggie's legitimate giraffe foundation with a simple, baffled query about the giraffe. It just suggested a real disconnection from reality.
And the lifestyle, come on, the lifestyle absolutely did not match the claims. She lived in a cookie-cutter suburban home that looked like every other house on the block.
Right. And she drove that old Lincoln, a car built, as the source notes, in the last century.
Mm-hmm.
She was notoriously and rigidly frugal. When Simon questioned her about it, she explained that Harry hated debt, which was just a perfect, convenient cover story for the reality that she simply didn't have money to spend.
She was, in reality, a lonely old woman living out a carefully constructed fantasy built on the memory of what might have been.
And Simon saw these contradictions. He did have these fleeting moments where he wondered if the fortune was a charade, a delusion conjured by a lonely mind. But desperation is a powerful filter.
It really is.
He allowed his greed to rationalize all the incongruities away, chalking it up to the eccentricities of the elderly, maybe calling them depression kid habits, the type of person who saves every penny even after they become wealthy.
Sure, you could see how he'd make that leap.
And instead of performing the proper financial due diligence a lawyer should perform on a $16 million estate, Simon doubles down on his seduction scheme. A strategy designed to win her loyalty.
That's right. He starts taking her to these increasingly expensive, diverse, and complicated ethnic restaurants, Korean, Thai, Greek, Indian, trying to build a personal relationship and secure that executorship. And in a final painful detail underscoring his existing poverty, he's paying for all these lunches himself, adding further debt to the credit card he can barely service, all to chase a ghost fortune.
He was spending real money to secure fake money. It's the ultimate confirmation of how the dream of $16 million created this tunnel vision, preventing him from seeing the obvious truth that would have saved his life and his career.
He was so focused on the future reward
That he was utterly blind to the immediate risk.
Okay, so the narrative takes a really hard pivot here. Simon Latch is still operating under the assumption that he's securing this massive estate, even as Eleanor Barnett's body is released.
Great. The clock is ticking.
And the truth about her finances comes spilling out. But not before Simon has done enough damage to himself to look like a stone-cold killer operating on a tight timeline. We need to detail how the investigators, not Simon, finally confirmed the fantasy versus the harsh financial reality.
The confirmation of the hoax came much, much later, long after the murder charges were filed. And this investigation was spearheaded by the conservator, a guy named Clement Gelly, and the stepson's lawyer, Teddy Hammer.
Okay.
They finally tracked down the elusive wealth advisor in Atlanta, Buddy Brown, who had handled Harry and Eleanor's portfolio before Harry's death, and Brown delivered the devastating blow to the $16 million fantasy.
What's so fascinating here is that the initial story Nettie told about the Coca-Cola and Walmart stock wasn't a total lie, was it? It was a truth that was twisted by this massive, catastrophic financial failure.
Exactly. Brown revealed that Harry and Eleanor had indeed been wealthy, perhaps even possessing more than $16 million at one point. But they had poured millions, first a $5 million investment, and then a subsequent $5 million into a massively failed Caribbean island development called Montrouge.
Montrouge?
Yeah. Harry had even begun building a large retirement home there, dreaming of living like royalty. But Montrouge collapsed, and it took their wealth with it.
So the $16 million fortune Simon was chasing had been effectively gone for years.
For years. The Walmart stock was all gone, liquidated to cover the Montrouge losses, and the famed Coca-Cola stock, the anchor of the supposed fortune, was reduced to less than $500,000.
That's that $500,000.
The entire claim Simon was banking on was revealed as a complete hoax, a delusion perpetrated by a lonely old woman who simply couldn't face the reality of being financially ruined.
This is the critical juncture. Simon was chasing air. Yet, when the police arrested him, they had no knowledge of this financial reality. All they saw was the motive that Simon himself had manufactured for them.
Oh, absolutely.
Eleanor was hospitalized after a serious DUI accident. She registered a .09 blood alcohol content, suffered 2 broken ribs, and sustained knee damage. This is the stage where Simon, driven by the urgency of securing the estate, just cements his role as the primary suspect.
And he did it by acting as the attentive, professional, and ultimately self-serving lawyer. During her hospitalization, Simon prepared 2 documents that would be used as lethal weapons against him later.
Right.
First, her final will, which revoked the previous version held by another lawyer, Wally Simon, and crucially, secured Simon's role as the executor, responsible for distributing the supposed $16 million to various nonprofits.
And second, he ensured the signing of her advance directive.
Yes, which specified 2 things. No resuscitation in case of medical crisis, and most damningly, immediate cremation upon death.
I mean, that arrangement, a brand new will signed just days before her death and an order for immediate cremation, it created the perfect visual evidence the prosecution needed.
It was a gift to them, a desperate lawyer rushing to destroy the body and secure a massive fortune before an autopsy could reveal foul play. And the timeline, as we touched on earlier, was just fatally convenient.
The timing is everything in a circumstantial case like this.
Everything. The deadline to potentially avoid that $8 million federal estate tax hit was December 31st, the New Year's cutoff. Eleanor Barnett died on December 30th, 2015.
Right on the cusp.
So the prosecution could argue, with irrefutable logic, that Simon, facing crushing debt and watching the clock tick down on the tax deadline, had to act immediately to claim the fees on the estate before it was too late. It paints a picture of a calculated, premeditated murder driven by extreme financial desperation.
Let's talk about the immediate aftermath of her death, because this is where the real killer makes his move, and in doing so, inadvertently frames Simon Latch even further.
Yeah, this part is crazy.
Eleanor Barnett was pronounced dead at 10:02 a.m., initially attributed to complications from pneumonia. The cremation order was already in place. Everything was proceeding according to the plan Simon had drafted.
But just minutes later, at 10:26 a.m., the process was violently halted. An anonymous, disguised tip was received, sent from a cheap burner phone whose signal bounced off the hospital's cell tower.
And the message.
It directed Detective Roger Barr to stop the cremation immediately, claiming the death was suspicious.
That tip is the key intervention, isn't it? Without it, the body would have been cremated, the poison would have been vaporized, and the death would have remained officially labeled as pneumonia.
Exactly. The stepson's lawyer, Teddy Hammer, fueled by his own suspicion and greed, used that tip to successfully lobby the court for an autopsy.
And the autopsy revealed the chilling, undeniable truth.
Eleanor died of acute toxic poisoning. Specifically, the toxicologists found significant lethal levels of thallium. Now, the prosecution had murder, motive, and a means of delivery.
And the means of delivery were dropped right back in Simon Latch's lap. The thallium was found in the Saigon ginger cookies, which Simon himself had purchased at Tan Lu's Vietnamese restaurant. He had instructed his secretary, Matilda, to deliver the cookies to Eleanor's hospital room on 2 separate occasions as a gesture of goodwill, part of his seduction scheme.
So, to the police, the motive is crystal clear. Simon, completely drowning in debt, remember, he had maxed out his $10,000 credit card, paying Nettie's $1,200 a day hospital charges during a previous extended stay.
Right.
He was facing divorce. He owed Chubb $6,300. He killed her to secure that massive fake $16 million fortune before the year end.
It truly is the perfect crime narrative, despite the core motive being completely fictional. The facts were simple enough for a grand jury and eventually a trial jury. Simon was the last lawyer. He was demonstrably desperate for cash. He had access to the victim, provided the delivery system, the poisoned cookies, and he had ordered the immediate destruction of the evidence via cremation. In the eyes of law enforcement, they had their open and shut case.
And the failure on Simon's part was not the murder itself, but the lack of financial imagination. Had he killed her, he would have realized the estate was worthless immediately. But the police didn't care about the true value. They only cared that Simon thought the estate was worth $16 million.
His greed hadn't just blinded him to the hoax.
It had manufactured the evidence of his own intent.
So Simon is now indicted for first-degree murder. The prosecution, led by the formidable Cora Cook, knew exactly how to present this to the public and the jury. The media frenzy was immediate and vicious.
Of course.
The Oregon headline, for example, didn't mince words. Virginia lawyer arrested for poisoning rich client. Simon was universally and immediately condemned in his own town of Braxton.
And that deep inherent prejudice against lawyers was a massive accelerant for the prosecution's case. Simon's own lawyer, Raymond Lassiter, noted the stark reality. You can't find 3 people in Braxton who believe otherwise. So Cora Cook built this classic slam dunk case, relying entirely on narrative and circumstantial evidence. Simon provided the poisoned cookies. He created a self-serving will.
Even though the money went to nonprofits.
Right, but he was the executor controlling the disbursement, which was the source of his massive fee. And he ordered the cremation to destroy the evidence. It was all laid out for them.
Let's pause on that point, because this is where the justice system's tunnel vision really comes into sharp relief. The absurdity of the case was in the details surrounding the poison itself. Thallium, we learned from the source material, has been banned in the U.S. for over 30 years.
Right.
It's not something you can just pick up at the local hardware store.
Absolutely not. During cross-examination, the forensic toxicologist, Dr. Roster, was forced to admit the massive hole in the prosecution's theory of means. He confirmed that even highly trained experts in the nation, let alone a small-town general practitioner like Simon, do not know who to call or where to go to purchase banned poison like thallium. It simply does not circulate publicly.
Wait a minute. So if the Commonwealth's own forensic expert admits that Simon Latch, a small-time lawyer focused on fender benders, would have had no realistic access to a highly specialized banned heavy metal poison, why didn't the defense use that massive hole to establish reasonable doubt immediately?
And that is the essential, devastating flaw of the trial. The jury wasn't focused on the forensic impossibility. They were focused on the motive.
The story.
The story. The narrative of the greedy, desperate lawyer who needed $16 million so badly that he would commit murder overrode logic and proof. The circumstantial evidence of the cookies, the new will, the cremation order, all actions Simon took publicly and professionally were so powerful that the jury prioritized the compelling narrative over the inconvenient, factual proof about the poison's origin.
They believed the motive, so they ignored the means.
Exactly.
The outcome then was inevitable. Simon Latch was convicted of first-degree murder, subjected to the humiliating perp walk in Virginia Beach, and locked up. His career over, his life ruined.
The system had failed him entirely. They closed the case and moved on. The Braxton police had their man, and the prosecutor, Cora Cook, had her career-defining victory.
So how does Simon, now a convicted felon, manage to overturn a slam-dunk case?
He had to become the very outlaw the police assumed he was. He had to operate outside the legal system, relying on extraordinary measures.
He had to become his own investigator. His resources were his tireless pro bono lawyer, Raymond Lassiter, his old flame, FBI agent Landy, who offered crucial insights and confidential connections, and a brilliant, though entirely illicit, hacker friend named Xander.
And Simon spent hours, even while incarcerated and later on bond, buried in meticulous hospital records. He was charting every movement, every nurse, every technician who entered Eleanor's room during her final days.
So he's looking for a pattern.
He's looking for anything. And this is how the breakthrough happened. Simon compiled a list of everyone who was present. Xander, the hacker, managed to illegally worm his way into the hospital's internal personnel and scheduling systems, a monumental felony-level breach, to cross-reference these lists with scheduling data.
And Agent Landy?
She provided the necessary confidential crime data context to know what to look for.
And the combination of Simon's persistence and Xander's illegal network identified Oscar Kofi. Simon vaguely recalled meeting him. He was an X-ray technician who had been in Eleanor's room for a routine procedure.
Right. Kofi's public bio was bland, but once Xander drilled into his full employment history, a history no standard police background check had bothered to cross-reference across state lines, it revealed a terrifying pattern.
What did they find?
Kofi's employment history showed he had worked in hospitals in Baltimore and Scranton, Pennsylvania, before moving to Virginia. And this is where the pattern emerges. In Baltimore, 3 elderly patients under his care died mysteriously of unknown causes. The deaths were similar to Eleanor's, but never fully investigated. Then, in Scranton, 2 more mysterious deaths occurred at a place called Fendamar Health, deaths that displayed the highly specific, chilling symptoms of thallium poisoning.
Like what?
Severe headaches, nausea, internal bleeding, and later, distinctive skin rashes. It was a clear signature.
And this is the true heart of the systemic failure that allowed a serial killer to operate for years. In Scranton, Kofi worked at Fendamar Health, the 3rd largest private hospital system in Pennsylvania. The victim's lawyer, Victor Mulrooney, got wind of the mysterious deaths and suspected foul play.
But, and this is the key part, instead of handing Kofi over to criminal authorities, Fendamar Health prioritized its institutional reputation and its massive financial bottom line.
They paid a settlement.
A staggering confidential settlement to Mulrooney and the victims' families. And that settlement was protected by an ironclad non-disclosure agreement, an NDA, which effectively silenced the victims and prevented any criminal investigation.
Unbelievable.
And Mulrooney, knowing the difficulty and expense of fighting a powerful private health system in court, made the calculated decision to take the fortune and bury the story, allowing Kofi to simply resign and move quietly to Virginia.
That decision, driven entirely by institutional reputation and the desire for financial expediency on the part of the lawyer in the hospital, allowed Oscar Kofi, who was truly an angel of death, serial killer, to slip through the cracks and continue his homicidal pattern.
He moved to Virginia, was hired. killed Eleanor Barnett and directly caused the wrongful conviction and ruin of Simon Latch.
And the sheer irony is that the police and the state justice system never found this.
Never. Simon's hacker, Xander, and his hacker boyfriend, Cooley, who was actually operating from a federal prison using contraband cell phones, adding another layer of criminality.
Yeah.
They achieved what the professional justice system refused to do.
Right.
They connected the dots across multiple states through illegally obtained personnel files. It confirms the horrifying reality that sometimes the only path to a buried truth is through the shadow world, because the institutions tasked with justice actively suppressed the information.
So based on the overwhelming, compelling, and illegally obtained evidence Simon's team unearthed regarding Oscar Kofi's pattern, the FBI and U.S. Attorney finally had no choice but to open a new investigation.
I had to.
This led to the post-conviction hearing, the moment where Simon Latch's fate, though already damaged beyond repair, hung in the balance of judicial reflection.
And Judge Shyam presided over the motion to vacate the guilty verdict. The sources note she was visibly affected by the documentation concerning Kofi's history and the clear context of wrongful conviction. She took great pains to emphasize that, contrary to public belief, juries do get it wrong, and sometimes horribly so.
She cited examples.
Oh, yeah. She cited local harrowing cases of later exoneration. Herman Dungy, who spent 31 years wrongly imprisoned, Boyd Keenan, 18 years, and Harlan Miller, who had spent 28 years on death row.
Her reference to those cases was a necessary judicial admission that the system is fallible and that the overwhelming narrative of the greedy lawyer had led the court astray.
It was. And she ultimately vacated the guilty verdict, declaring Simon innocent. Justice of a sort was served, but at a catastrophic personal and professional cost. Simon was declared innocent, yet his life was professionally and socially described as a lost home.
Simon's losses were immediate and staggering, and they were irreversible. His 18-year career was completely extinguished. The State Bar Association, citing the mandatory disciplinary statutes for lawyers convicted of felonies, yanked his law license.
Right.
The conviction, even though it was vacated, rendered him utterly toxic in Braxton. Few friends had defended him during the trial, and the press had thoroughly and permanently smeared him as the hungry lawyer seduces rich widow, then poisons her.
And the financial consequences of his near-fatal greed were finalized by his desperation to get out on bond. He was forced to sell his office building, the same building where he slept in the closet, to his bookie, Chubb.
No way.
Yeah. He sold it for $41,000 more than the existing mortgages, purely to scrape together the hefty $30,000 bond money required for his initial release.
So he literally sacrificed his professional identity and his last vestige of stability just to achieve temporary freedom.
And transferred ownership of his life directly to the man whose debt started the entire tragic spiral.
His personal life was equally devastated. His wife and family had already fled to Danville, and the prospect of reconciliation was bleak. Simon, exiled and ruined, found solace only in literature. He started a deep dive into John D. MacDonald's Travis McGee novels, a series that centers on a private salvage consultant who lives on a boat and operates outside the typical legal structure.
Which is pretty fitting.
Very fitting. The novel served as a powerful reminder of his carefree law school days, an escape into a simpler world, and a reflection of his own new, unwanted identity as an outlaw.
And this brings us to the final crushing irony of the entire deep dive. Simon Latch endured a murder conviction, spent time incarcerated, lost his family, lost his career, and suffered profound, lasting self-loathing over the relentless, debt-fueled pursuit of a $16 million fortune.
A fortune, we must always remember, that was nothing more than a fiction, a delusion woven by Eleanor Barnett.
Exactly. She played him perfectly, using his desperate need for money as leverage against his legal professionalism. His downfall wasn't due to a successful crime. It was due to his utter catastrophic failure to verify the basic premise of his client's claim, driven entirely by his overwhelming need for cash.
He was ruined over an estate that, after all the legal wrangling, was eventually valued at what?
Substantially less than $500,000.
Less than $500,000. He sought retribution against all those who doubted him and condemned him. The prosecution, the jury, the press. But his final, bitter realization was that he was completely played by a lonely old woman living in the past.
Yeah. A victim not of a grand conspiracy, but of her own delusion and his own overwhelming greed.
So the true cost of that overwhelming greed, as demonstrated by Simon Latch's journey, is far worse than mere moral failure. It is absolute exposure to a system that will readily convict based purely on motive and circumstantial evidence, particularly when the accused fits a negative stereotype like the greedy lawyer.
The truth that the underlying financial facts were fake and the real killer was a hidden professional criminal was irrelevant to the court's immediate desire for a clean conviction.
And this leads us to the grim, lasting reality uncovered at the very end. Oscar Kofi's dangerous, murderous activities across 3 states were only uncovered because Simon Latch, acting like a desperate outlaw, used black market knowledge, hackers, and confidential FBI contacts.
He went places the professional justice system refused to go because they had already closed the case. They were complacent because they had a perfect narrative.
The failure wasn't just Kofi's ability to kill. It was the institutional failure of a major hospital system, Fendamar Health, to cover up and silence victims using massive confidential NDAs.
That legal instrument, the non-disclosure agreement, was used to prioritize institutional reputation and financial indemnity over public safety and justice. And it directly enabled a serial killer to walk away and continue murdering until a desperate, convicted lawyer stumbled upon the buried truth.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? We've seen the power of narrative over fact and the devastating consequences of unchecked greed. Next time, when something seems overwhelmingly too good to be true, ask yourself what trap you're walking into.
And more importantly, the enduring provocative thought is this. Oscar Kofi was only caught because the corporate system failed to protect his pattern completely, leaving a tiny digital thread for a hacker to pull. And it raises the sobering, disturbing question. How many other Oscar Kofis are operating today, their dangerous patterns protected and silenced by lucrative NDAs and institutional inaction, completely invisible to unmotivated or budget-constrained police investigations? That's something that should make everyone mull over the true cost of institutional silence.
That wraps up this Omni Deep Dive episode. Thank you for listening. If you found value in today's deep dive, please click like and subscribe to our channel. Take care.